The flight attendant's voice cracked over the cabin speaker, sharp and impatient. "Sir, I need you to stand up. Now." Every sound in the cabin seemed to collapse into that sentence. The low hum of the engines, the soft clink of glassware, the rustle of newspapers held by aging hands. All of it froze. Seat 2D. A black man in his mid-50s, calm posture, grey wool coat folded neatly across his lap, one hand resting on a leather briefcase that looked older than most of the passengers watching him. He did not move. The plane was still parked at the gate, jet bridge attached, the late afternoon sun slicing through the oval windows and striping the aisle in pale gold. Outside, ground crews moved with routine urgency. Inside, something had gone very wrong. "Sir?" The flight attendant stepped closer. Her heels clicked too fast, too loud. "You're in the wrong seat." A woman across the aisle inhaled sharply. An older man near the bulkhead lowered his reading glasses. Someone in the back whispered, "That can't be right." The man in 2D lifted his eyes slowly. Not startled, not angry, just focused. His name was Harold Whitman, 56 years old, broad shoulders softened by time, the kind of face that carried both patience and memory. He looked at the attendant as if measuring the weight of her words. "I'm not," he said quietly. The attendant did not answer him. She turned instead to the purser standing behind her, a woman with a rigid smile and a jaw set in permanent authority. Linda Cooper, 45, immaculate uniform, perfect hair. The expression of someone already convinced she was right. "He won't cooperate," Linda said, loud enough for half the cabin to hear. That did it. A murmur spread, low, uneasy. The kind of sound that came from people who had lived long enough to recognize trouble when it started breathing. Harold reached into his jacket with slow, deliberate movements. He removed a boarding pass, folded once, clean edges, and held it up between two fingers. Seat 2D, business class, purchased last week. Linda did not take it. She barely looked. Her eyes slid past the paper and returned to his face, then to his coat, his briefcase, his shoes. Scuffed but clean. Sensible, not flashy, not impressive. "Sir," she said, lowering her voice in a way that somehow made it sharper, "there has been a reassignment. I need you to collect your belongings." Harold felt the cabin watching him now. He could sense it the way you sense weather changing, pressure building. He exhaled slowly through his nose. "Before I move," he said, "I'd like to understand why." A pause. Too long. Behind Linda, another figure leaned forward in her seat. Margaret Reynolds, 67, diamond tier. A woman who had flown this route for decades and believed loyalty was a form of ownership. Her pearl earrings caught the light as she tilted her head, lips pressed thin. "He's holding up boarding," she said. Her voice carried the practiced authority of someone used to being heard. "Some of us have connections to make." Linda nodded slightly, grateful. "Mrs. Reynolds is correct, sir. We are already behind schedule." Harold turned his head just enough to acknowledge Margaret's presence. He did not glare. He did not smile. He simply looked at her. "I'm sorry for the delay, Mom," he said. "I didn't create it." Margaret's eyes flicked down his coat, then back up. Her mouth tightened. "Well," she said, "maybe if you dressed the part, this wouldn't be happening." A few passengers shifted in their seats. A man in his 70s shook his head once, slow and disapproving. His wife placed a hand on his arm, a silent warning not to get involved. Linda straightened. "Sir, this is your final request." Request. The word hung there. Harold folded his boarding pass and slid it back into his pocket. His fingers brushed the edge of the briefcase. He felt the familiar weight of it, the soft, worn leather, the latch that never quite closed properly. His father's case. carried through courtrooms and union halls and meetings where no one expected much from him either. He looked down the aisle, the narrow path between rows of quiet judgment. "I'll stand," he said, "but I'm not leaving the aircraft." Linda's smile hardened. "Captain Keller has been notified." The name rippled through the cabin like a draft. Thomas Keller, 59, veteran pilot, respected, trusted, a man whose authority rarely needed reinforcement. Moments later, the cockpit door opened. Captain Keller stepped out with the careful composure of someone used to command. He scanned the scene quickly. The purser, the seated man, the cluster of eyes. "What's the issue?" he asked. Linda spoke first. "Passenger refusing to comply with reassignment." Harold met Keller's gaze, held it. "Captain," he said, steady, "I have a valid ticket for this seat. I'm not refusing to comply. I'm asking for an explanation." Keller hesitated, just a beat, long enough to matter. He pulled the tablet from under his arm, tapped, scrolled. His brow furrowed slightly. "The seat assignment is valid," he said. Linda stiffened. "But the system flagged him as disruptive." "Disruptive?" Harold repeated. He almost smiled, but didn't. Keller glanced at Margaret Reynolds. She leaned forward just enough for him to notice. "This flight is always full of surprises, Captain," she said lightly. "Some of us expect a certain standard." The words landed where they were meant to. Keller looked back at Harold. He saw a man who did not look dangerous, did not look loud, did not look like trouble. But the clock was ticking. The cabin was watching, and precedent was a powerful thing. "Sir," Keller said, choosing his words carefully, "for now I need you to step off the aircraft so we can resolve this without further delay." Without further delay. Harold absorbed that. He nodded once. All right. He stood. The motion was smooth, controlled. No sudden movements, no protest. He lifted the briefcase, slid his coat over his arm. As he stepped into the aisle, someone clapped once. A single, sharp sound. It stopped as quickly as it began. Harold did not look back to see who it was. Linda stepped aside, satisfied. Margaret settled deeper into her seat, a faint look of relief crossing her face. As Harold walked toward the exit, the jet bridge waiting like an open wound, the cabin remained silent. Not the silence of agreement, the silence of recognition. At the door, he paused, turned just enough to look at Captain Keller. "I hope you'll review this carefully, Captain," he said. "Some decisions echo longer than a delay." Keller said nothing. Harold stepped onto the jet bridge. The door closed behind him with a heavy, final sound. Inside the cabin, the engines hummed back to life. Outside, Harold stood still, the noise of the airport wrapping around him. He adjusted his grip on the briefcase. His face was calm, but his eyes had gone cold. This was not over. The jet bridge smelled like cold metal and burned coffee, the kind of recycled air that never quite left your clothes. Harold Whitman stood just beyond the aircraft door, the hum of the cabin sealed behind him, replaced by the distant roar of engines and the hollow echo of footsteps moving past without looking at him. An airport operations officer cleared his throat. "Sir, if you'll come with me, we'll get this sorted out." Get this sorted out. The phrase carried no promise, only procedure. Harold followed without resistance. His shoes tapped softly against the rubberized floor as they walked, the sound swallowed by the cavernous terminal beyond the glass. Travelers hurried by, dragging rolling bags, eyes forward, minds already somewhere else. No one noticed the man who had just been removed from a business-class seat for reasons no one would put clearly into words. They stopped near a service desk, tucked between a closed gift shop and a maintenance door marked "Authorized Personnel Only." The officer gestured toward a plastic chair. "Please, have a seat." Harold sat, He placed the briefcase upright between his shoes, rested both hands on it, and waited. Minutes passed, the kind that stretch. He could hear his own breathing, slow, controlled. He had learned that rhythm years ago, in rooms where tempers flared and deals fell apart because someone spoke too quickly. The officer returned with the tablet. "Sir, I just need to confirm your information. Name: Harold Whitman." The officer typed, paused, typed again. "Date of birth?" Harold answered. The officer's fingers slowed. His posture shifted slightly, as if something in the data did not match the man sitting in front of him. "Sir, are you aware of any reason the crew might consider you a security concern?" Harold looked at him. Truly looked. The officer was young, early 30s, clean uniform, earnest eyes, trying to do the right thing inside a system that rarely explained itself. "No," Harold said. "I am not." The officer nodded, unsure what to do with that. "Let me make a call." He stepped away, lowered his voice. Harold could hear fragments. Confirmation. Corporate. "Hold on." Harold leaned back in the chair and closed his eyes for a moment. Not to escape, to remember. He remembered his father standing in line at the bank on the south side of Detroit, hat in hand, waiting while others were waved forward. He remembered the way people spoke slower to him, louder, as if intelligence traveled differently depending on who was listening. He remembered promising himself, years later, that if he ever had authority, he would use it quietly, precisely. His phone vibrated once in his coat pocket. He did not rush to answer. He waited until the vibration stopped, then reached for it. A single text message from an unsaved number. "Are you clear of the aircraft?" Harold typed back, "Yes." Seconds later, the phone rang. He answered. "I'm sorry you're dealing with this," the voice said. Calm, familiar, female. "This shouldn't have happened." "It did," Harold replied. A pause. "We can intervene." "Not yet," Harold said. "I want the facts documented, every step." "Understood." He ended the call, slid the phone back into his pocket. The officer returned, his face no longer neutral. "Sir, there seems to be some confusion regarding your status with the airline." Harold raised an eyebrow. "Confusion is one word for it." The officer swallowed. He glanced at the tablet again. "Sir, would you mind waiting here a bit longer?" Harold nodded. "Of course." The officer walked away faster this time. Inside the cabin, boarding had resumed. The door closed. The safety announcement began. Margaret Reynolds adjusted her seatbelt and glanced toward the front, expecting movement, resolution. Instead, the plane remained at the gate longer than expected. Linda Cooper stood in the galley, arms crossed, jaw tight. She replayed the scene in her mind, searching for any detail she might have missed. She told herself she had followed procedure. She told herself that standards mattered. Still, something uneasy crawled under her skin. Captain Keller sat in the cockpit, staring at the instrument panel without seeing it. He prided himself on judgment, on instincts honed over decades. Yet the man's words echoed in his head. Some decisions echo longer than a delay. The chime sounded. A message from operations flashed on his screen. "Hold at gate. Do not taxi. Await further instruction." Keller frowned. He keyed the intercom. "We're getting a short delay, folks. Shouldn't be long." Margaret huffed. Unbelievable. Back in the terminal, Harold stood now, no longer sitting. The officer had returned with another man. Older, grey hair, better suit, a corporate posture. "Mr. Whitman," the man said, extending a hand. "My name is Daniel Brooks. I'm with Airline Legal and Operations." Harold shook his hand firmly. We're reviewing an incident report involving your removal from the aircraft, Brooks continued. There appear to be discrepancies. Harold said nothing. Brooks cleared his throat. For clarity, sir, can you confirm your current role with Whitman Holdings? Harold held Brooks's gaze. I can confirm that my role is active. Brooks's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. Thank you, he said. That's sufficient. He stepped aside and made another call. His voice dropped. Harold caught words like board notification, interim authority, public exposure. A ripple of motion spread through the nearby staff. Eyes flicked toward Harold. Whispers traveled. Minutes later, Brooks returned. His tone had changed. Respect edged into it now, sharp and unmistakable. Sir, we need to escort you back to the aircraft. Harold did not move right away. Before we do that, he said, I want one thing on record. I did not raise my voice. I did not refuse a lawful instruction. I did not threaten anyone. Brooks nodded quickly. That is already noted. Good, Harold said. Then let's proceed. They walked together toward the gate. The plane waited, engines quiet. Passengers shifted in their seats as the door reopened. Linda looked up and felt her stomach drop. Harold stepped onto the aircraft again. Not hurried, not dramatic, just present. Brooks followed, along with the operations officer and a woman in a dark blazer carrying a folder thick with paper. Captain Keller emerged from the cockpit, confusion etched across his face. What's going on? He asked. Brooks spoke first. Captain, we are placing this flight on an operational hold pending internal review. Linda opened her mouth. Captain, this is unnecessary. The passenger was disruptive. Ola turned to her. Disruptive, he said softly. Is that the word you're standing by? Linda felt heat rise to her cheeks. I followed protocol. Harold nodded. Then we'll review the protocol. The cabin was silent again, but this time it was different. It was alert, expectant. Margaret Reynolds clutched her armrest. She watched Harold with new eyes now, searching his face for clues she had missed. Authority had a way of revealing itself not through volume, but gravity. Harold faced the passengers. He did not raise his voice. He did not smile. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for your patience, he said. This aircraft will remain at the gate for a short time while we address a procedural failure that occurred moments ago. I apologize for the inconvenience. Procedural failure. The phrase landed like a verdict. Captain Keller swallowed hard. Harold turned slightly, enough to meet the captain's eyes. Captain, he said, I would like a word with you and your crew. Not here, Keller replied instinctively. Harold's gaze did not waver. Here is exactly where it needs to happen. The weight of that sentence pressed down on the cabin. No one moved. No one spoke. The rising tempo did not slow. Captain Keller felt the shift before he fully understood it. The cabin was no longer a place he controlled. It had become a witness. He nodded once, stiffly, and motioned toward the forward galley. Linda hesitated, then followed, her shoulders tight, her chin lifted in defiance that no longer convinced even herself. Two other crew members trailed behind them, eyes down, hands folded, moving like people who knew they were walking into something that could not be undone. Harold remained where he was for a moment longer. He could feel the eyes on his back, feel the questions forming in the quiet. He turned his head slightly, just enough to catch the gaze of the older man who had shaken his head earlier. The man met his eyes and gave the smallest nod. Not approval, recognition. Harold stepped forward. The galley was cramped, stainless steel and fluorescent light. A space designed for efficiency, not confrontation. The kind of place where voices carried, whether you wanted them to or not. Captain Keller closed the curtain halfway, a symbolic gesture more than a barrier. It did nothing to stop the sound. Let's be clear, Keller said, lowering his voice. This situation escalated unnecessarily. My priority is the safety and schedule of this flight. Harold looked at him. He did not lean in. He did not crowd him. He simply stood, hands relaxed at his sides. Safety was never compromised, Harold said. Schedule was, because of a choice. Linda crossed her arms. With respect, sir, we make choices every day to maintain order. Some passengers don't understand boundaries. Harold turned his attention to her slowly, deliberately. What boundary did I cross? Linda opened her mouth, closed it. Her eyes flicked to Keller for support. You refused a crew instruction, Keller said. I asked for clarification, Howard replied. There's a difference. Keller's jaw tightened. You could have complied and addressed it later. Later never comes for some people, Harold said. The words landed heavier than their volume suggested. One of the junior attendants shifted her weight, swallowing hard. Linda's voice sharpened. This isn't about feelings, it's about protocol. Mrs. Reynolds is a priority customer. She expressed discomfort. Discomfort, Harold repeated. At my presence. Linda's eyes flashed. At the disruption. Harold studied her face. He saw something beneath the rigidity now. Not malice. Fear. The kind that made people cling to rules because rules protected them from questions they did not want to answer. Who decides what a disruption looks like? Harold asked. You, or the manual? Linda hesitated. The pause betrayed her. Keller exhaled slowly. We don't have time for this. Operations wants us moving. A voice came from behind Harold. Operations wants accountability. The woman in the dark blazer stepped forward. She introduced herself quietly. Monica Hale, Compliance and Oversight. Keller stiffened. Linda's arms dropped to her sides. Monica opened her folder. Mr. Whitman's ticket was valid. His behavior was compliant. The removal was not justified under company policy or federal guidelines. Linda shook her head. He was argumentative. Monica did not look up. Asking questions is not argumentative. The silence stretched. Somewhere in the cabin, a seatbelt sign chimed off, unnoticed. Harold felt the moment tilt. This was where people usually expected him to press, to expose, to dominate. He did not. Instead, he stepped back half a pace. This isn't about punishing anyone, he said. It's about understanding how easily this happened. Margaret Reynolds shifted in her seat. She could hear every word now. The curtain did nothing. Her heart beat faster than she liked to admit. Linda laughed once, brittle. With all due respect, sir, you're making this bigger than it needs to be. Harold met her gaze. I didn't make it big. I just didn't shrink. That did it. Keller looked away first. Monica closed the folder. Captain, under policy, I am placing this crew on immediate operational pause pending review. Linda's breath caught. You can't do that mid-flight. We're not in flight, Monica replied. Keller's voice dropped. What does that mean? It means this aircraft is grounded until a replacement crew is assigned. A wave of reaction rolled through the cabin. Gasps, murmurs. Someone cursed under their breath. Another laughed, sharp and incredulous. Margaret's face drained of color. Grounded. That word carried consequences she did not like. Linda stepped forward. This is ridiculous. Over one passenger. Harold's eyes flicked to her. Over one decision. Keller rubbed his face with both hands. You're talking about pulling an entire crew because of optics. Because of conduct, Monica said, and documentation. She turned to Harold. Sir, we will need a formal statement. Harold nodded. You'll have it. He turned back toward the cabin. The curtain was drawn fully now, but it no longer mattered. The story had already escaped. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said, his voice calm, carrying easily. "Thank you for your patience. The flight will be delayed. I understand that is frustrating. It is also necessary." Someone near the back clapped, hesitant. Then another joined. The sound did not swell, it steadied. Harold continued. "What happened earlier should not happen to anyone. Not here. Not anywhere. We are going to take the time to do this correctly." Margaret felt heat rise in her chest. This was spiraling. She raised her hand, then lowered it. No one was looking at her anymore. Linda stood frozen in the galley. Her authority had evaporated in increments she could feel, but not stop. Keller straightened his shoulders, instinct kicking in even as his control slipped. "Sir, with respect, who exactly are you to make these determinations?" The question echoed, not just in the galley, in the cabin, in the quiet spaces between people holding their breath. Harold looked at him for a long moment, long enough for the air to tighten. "I'm someone who believes procedure should protect people, not expose them," he said. That was not the answer Keller wanted, or expected. Monica stepped in smoothly. "Captain, we'll discuss roles shortly." Keller nodded stiffly. He turned away, retreating into the cockpit like a man stepping back from a line he had crossed without seeing. Linda remained. Her eyes were wet now. She looked at Harold, really looked, as if searching his face for something that would tell her how this ended. "I didn't know," she said quietly. Harold's voice softened just a fraction. "That's exactly the problem." He stepped past her, back into the aisle. The cabin parted around him, a subtle shift of bodies and attention. He returned to seat 2D, not to sit, but to retrieve his coat. As he lifted it, his phone vibrated again. A new message. "We're ready when you are." Harold slipped the phone into his pocket. He looked down the aisle once more, at the faces, the tension, the unease. This was no longer about a seat, and everyone could feel it. The cabin felt smaller now, as if the walls had leaned in to listen. Harold Whitman stood at the front of the business cabin, coat folded over his arm, briefcase still untouched at his feet. The plane was silent in a way that made people acutely aware of their own breathing. The delay clock on the overhead screen blinked, then disappeared altogether. Captain Keller remained inside the cockpit, door half closed, one hand braced against the frame. He had not sat down. Sitting felt like surrender. Monica Hale spoke quietly into her phone, her back turned, her voice clipped and precise. "Replacement crew en route. Yes. Full compliance review. Document everything." Linda Cooper leaned against the galley counter. Her hands trembled, despite her effort to still them. She kept telling herself this was a misunderstanding, a procedural overcorrection, something that would be walked back once the right people realized how inconvenient it all was. Margaret Reynolds did not sit back anymore. She leaned forward, fingers clenched around the armrest. The sense of entitlement she had carried so easily earlier was cracking, replaced by a creeping awareness that the ground beneath her was not as solid as she had believed. Harold turned to face the passengers again. He did not raise his voice. He never needed to. "I know delays are frustrating," he said, "especially for those of you who have flown longer than most of us have driven. You've earned efficiency. You've earned respect." A few heads nodded, slowly. "But respect has to be consistent," he continued, "not selective." Margaret felt the words hit her squarely. She shifted in her seat, then straightened her spine as if preparing to defend herself. "This airline has policies," Harold said. "Those policies exist for a reason. They protect the quiet passenger, the tired one, the one who doesn't look like trouble, but gets treated like it anyway." A man in the second row cleared his throat. He was in his early 70s, navy blazer worn thin at the elbows. "He had a ticket, didn't he?" he said, nodding toward Harold. "That's all that should matter." A ripple moved through the cabin. Agreement whispered, tentative but growing. Margaret turned sharply. "You don't understand the full context," she snapped. "Standards exist for a reason." Harold looked at her then, fully, not as an adversary, as a study. "Standards should never require someone else to disappear so we can be comfortable," he said. Margaret's mouth opened, closed. Her voice came out thinner than she intended. "I've flown this airline for 30 years. Harold nodded. "Loyalty matters. So does accountability." Monica ended her call and stepped forward. "Ladies and gentlemen," she said, "thank you for your patience. A new flight crew will arrive shortly. Until then, we ask that you remain seated." Linda let out a sound that was almost a sob. She pushed herself upright and faced Monica. "You can't seriously be doing this," she said. "I followed what I believed was correct procedure." "Belief is not policy," Monica replied. Linda's eyes darted to Harold. "If I had known who you were," Harold cut her off, gently but firmly. "Who I am should not have changed how you treated me." The sentence settled into the space between them, heavy, inescapable. Linda's shoulders sagged. For the first time since this began, the armor fell away. "I was trying to keep control," she said quietly. "We're trained to spot problems before they escalate." Harold stepped closer, lowering his voice so only she could hear. "Control without fairness is just force," he said. She swallowed hard. Captain Keller emerged from the cockpit at last. His expression had shifted from authority to calculation. He addressed Monica first. "What exactly are the implications here?" Monica met his gaze. "Immediate removal from duty pending review. Standard protocol." Keller's jaw clenched. "I have union protections." "Of course," Monica said. "Those will be respected." Margaret stood abruptly, the motion sharp enough to draw attention. "This is absurd," she said. "We are all being punished because one man refused to move seats." Harold turned toward her again. His tone remained even. "No one is being punished. A process is being corrected." Margaret scoffed. "Easy for you to say. You'll be on your way while the rest of us wait." Harold paused. He considered her carefully, not with anger, with something closer to disappointment. "I'm waiting too," he said. That landed differently than she expected. The cabin door opened. 2 uniformed crew members stepped inside, followed by a senior operations manager. The sight of unfamiliar faces in the aisle sent another wave of murmurs through the cabin. The manager approached Harold first. "Mr. Whitman, thank you for your patience." Harold nodded. "We're prepared to proceed with next steps." Linda watched, numb, as her authority evaporated completely. She felt small in a way she had not felt in years. Not because she was being corrected, but because she was realizing how easily she had justified the wrong choice. The manager turned to the cabin. "Ladies and gentlemen, we apologize for the delay. This flight will depart with a new crew shortly. We appreciate your understanding." A man near the window spoke up. "What about the earlier incident?" The manager hesitated, then looked to Harold. Harold answered instead. "It's being addressed," he said. "Fully." Margaret sank back into her seat. Her hands trembled now. She looked around and realized something unsettling. No one was looking at her with sympathy. They were looking with judgment. Quiet, unforgiving. Linda gathered her things slowly. Each movement felt ceremonial, final. She paused beside Harold. "I didn't think I was doing harm," she said. Harold met her eyes. Harm doesn't always announce itself. She nodded once, tears welling, and walked down the aisle without looking back. Captain Keller lingered. Pride wrestled with reality on his face. "You put me in an impossible position," he said to Harold. Harold shook his head. No. The position existed. You chose how to stand in it. Keller had no answer. As the old crew exited, the cabin breathed again. Not relief, something closer to resolve. Harold returned to his seat, sat down, placed the briefcase at his feet. Margaret stared at him, her voice barely above a whisper now. Are you someone important? Harold did not answer immediately. He looked out the window, watching the ground crew move with practiced precision. Importance is relative, he said finally. She nodded, chastened, unsure what else to say. The new crew began preparing the cabin. Different energy, quieter, careful. Harold closed his eyes for a moment. The rising tension had not broken, it had simply changed shape. The reveal was coming, and it would not be gentle. The cabin lights dimmed slightly as the new crew moved with deliberate calm, their presence noticeably different. No sharp gestures, no rushed voices, just quiet efficiency, the kind that came from knowing eyes were watching for the right reasons now. Harold Whitman remained seated in 2D, hands resting loosely on his knees. The briefcase at his feet looked unremarkable, scuffed corners, faded leather, but it carried weight that had nothing to do with what was inside. Margaret Reynolds watched him from the corner of her eye. She told herself she was simply curious, that it was natural to want to understand a situation that had spun so far beyond her control. Still, her pulse would not settle. She leaned closer, lowering her voice. I didn't mean what you think I meant earlier. Harold kept his gaze forward. I know exactly what you meant. The words were not cruel. They were precise. Margaret recoiled slightly, then straightened again, dignity fighting embarrassment. I've spent my life earning certain privileges, she said. This airline recognized that. Harold turned to her then, fully. Privilege that collapses under scrutiny was never solid to begin with. She looked away, lips pressed tight. In the forward galley, Monica Hale reviewed documents with the operations manager, their heads close together. Each page turned sounded loud in the quiet cabin. The name Whitman appeared more than once. Titles, authority, oversight. The operations manager exhaled slowly. We should make an announcement. Monica nodded, but not yet. Captain Keller sat alone in the cockpit, hands folded, staring at the blank screen in front of him. He had flown through storms, mechanical failures, medical emergencies. None of them had felt like this. This was different. This was erosion. He heard footsteps behind him. Monica. Captain, she said, your cooperation will be noted. Keller didn't look at her. Cooperation isn't what I'd call this. Monica studied him for a moment. Then call it consequence. Back in the cabin, a man several rows back cleared his throat. He was old enough that his voice carried authority earned through time, not volume. I want to say something, he said. Heads turned. The new crew paused, but did not interrupt. I've been flying since before deregulation, the man continued. I've seen airlines come and go. What I saw earlier didn't sit right with me, and I think most of us felt it. A few murmurs of agreement followed. Margaret felt her chest tighten. Harold listened without reaction. He had learned long ago that real validation rarely announced itself. The man continued. We don't all look the same. We don't all dress the same. But a ticket is a ticket, and a person is a person. The cabin remained silent after that, but it was a different silence now, one that carried weight instead of tension. Monica stepped into the aisle. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you. Before we depart, there is a matter that needs to be addressed transparently. Margaret's stomach dropped. Harold felt it too. The moment had arrived, not as a strike of thunder, but as pressure finally finding release. Monica continued. Earlier today, A passenger was removed from this aircraft based on an internal decision that did not align with company policy or federal passenger protections. That decision has been formally recorded. Captain Keller closed his eyes. Harold remained still. The airline takes these matters seriously, Monica said. Accountability is not optional. She turned slightly toward Harold. Mr. Whitman has agreed to speak. All eyes shifted. Harold stood. The motion was unhurried, controlled. When he turned to face the cabin, there was no anger on his face, only resolve. I didn't plan to speak today, he said. I boarded this flight as a passenger, nothing more. A few people leaned forward. I was removed from my seat, not because of safety, not because of policy, but because of perception. Because I did not fit an expectation someone else carried quietly until it became action. Margaret's fingers curled into her palms. Harold continued. Many of you have lived long enough to know this feeling. Maybe not on a plane, maybe in a store, a bank, a meeting, a neighborhood. He paused, let the words breathe. I didn't raise my voice earlier because I didn't need to. Systems don't reveal themselves when you shout at them. They reveal themselves when you let them act. The cabin absorbed that. What happened today matters, Harold said. Not because of who I am, but because of who it could have been. Monica stepped forward. For clarity, she said, Mr. Whitman currently serves as interim chair of this airline's board. The reaction was not explosive. It was quieter, sharper. Gasps, a hand over a mouth. Someone whispered, "Oh my God." Margaret's vision blurred. The realization hit her not like a slap, but like gravity suddenly doubling. Harold nodded once. I didn't take this flight to test anyone. I took it because change doesn't mean anything if you never see the ground. Captain Keller stood in the cockpit doorway now, pale. He understood the full shape of his mistake. Harold's voice did not rise. It did not need to. Effective immediately, he said. The crew originally assigned to this flight has been removed from duty, pending review. This is not a public shaming. It is a necessary pause. The word fired did not need to be spoken. Everyone heard it anyway. The cabin was completely silent. Every passenger on this flight will receive full compensation for the delay, Harold continued. Not as an apology, as acknowledgement. Margaret swallowed hard. And this seat, he said, gesturing toward the front, will not be used today. He turned slightly. An older woman, several rows back, looked up, startled as a new crew member gently approached her. Ma'am, we'd like to invite you to move forward if you're comfortable. The woman's eyes widened. She glanced at Harold, uncertain. He nodded to her once, kindly. She stood slowly, supported by her husband, disbelief and gratitude mingling on her face. Margaret watched the exchange with something breaking quietly inside her. Harold returned to his seat, sat down. The cabin exhaled. The engines remained off. The flight had not yet resumed. But something else had moved forward. Captain Keller retreated into the cockpit, his career hanging in a balance he no longer controlled. Margaret stared straight ahead, the reflection in the window no longer flattering. Harold rested his hand on the briefcase, feeling its worn edge under his fingers. This was only the beginning, and everyone on that plane knew it. The engines came alive again with a low, steady rumble, but the cabin did not return to normal. Normal had slipped away somewhere between the first accusation and the quiet announcement of authority. What remained was awareness. Harold Whitman sat still as the aircraft doors closed. The new crew moved with deliberate restraint, every gesture measured, every word chosen carefully. They were professionals, but they were also witnesses now. conscious that this flight would be remembered long after the wheels left the ground. Margaret Reynolds kept her eyes forward. The confidence that once filled her posture had thinned into rigidity. She replayed her words in her head, each one sharper in hindsight. Standards. Discomfort. The phrases sounded smaller now, exposed by the light of consequence. The older woman who had been invited forward settled into the vacant seat near the front. She clutched the armrests as if the chair itself might disappear. Her husband leaned close, whispering reassurance. She glanced back once, catching Harold's eye, and nodded with quiet gratitude. He returned the nod. Nothing more. Captain Keller remained behind the cockpit door. He had not re-emerged. He did not need to. His authority had already been stripped down to something procedural, temporary, pending. In aviation, that was a dangerous place to stand. The aircraft pushed back from the gate at last. The delay clock resumed, its numbers ticking upward, but no one complained. The flight attendant's safety briefing played over the speakers, calm and unremarkable, as if nothing extraordinary had happened. Yet every word landed in a cabin that had been permanently altered. As the plane climbed, the city fell away beneath the clouds. The sun dipped lower, casting long shadows across the wing. Harold watched it without thinking, his reflection faint in the glass. He felt the familiar weight settle in his chest. Not triumph, not relief, but responsibility. Across the aisle, a man in his late 60s leaned forward slightly. "Sir," he said quietly. Harold turned his head. "I just wanted to say thank you. I've got grandkids. I'd want them treated the way you handled that." Harold nodded. "I appreciate that." The man hesitated. "You could have made a bigger scene." Harold's eyes softened. Loud doesn't always mean lasting. The man smiled faintly and leaned back. Margaret heard the exchange. It tightened something in her throat. She had spent years believing that power meant being protected from discomfort. She was realizing, too late, that it often meant being insulated from truth. She cleared her throat. "Mr. Whitman." Harold looked at her. "I owe you an apology," she said. Her voice wavered, then steadied. "I spoke from habit, from a place I never questioned." Harold studied her for a moment. He could see the effort it took for her to say the words, the vulnerability beneath the polish. "What matters is what you do next," he said. She nodded, eyes glistening. "I understand that now." The plane cruised smoothly. Drinks were served. Quiet conversations resumed, tentative at first, then more natural. But the undercurrent remained. People were thinking, remembering, measuring their own past silences. In the galley, the new purser briefed the crew in low voices. Documentation would be filed, statements collected. The earlier crew's actions would be reviewed not just internally, but by regulators who did not care about seniority or loyalty tiers. Linda Cooper sat alone in a small office near the gate, uniform folded on her lap, staring at a wall that offered no answers. Her phone buzzed with messages she did not open. She replayed the moment she had said disruptive, the ease with which the word had come. She wondered how many times she had done the same thing without consequence. The realization pressed down harder than any reprimand. Captain Keller's phone rang once in the cockpit. He answered it without speaking. The voice on the other end did not raise its tone. It did not need to. When the call ended, Keller sat very still, the enormity of what he had risked finally settling in. He had thought he was preserving order. He had forgotten who order was meant to serve. At cruising altitude, Harold opened his briefcase for the first time. Inside were no contracts, no symbols of wealth, just a folder, neatly organized, and a framed photograph tucked carefully into the side. His father, younger, standing outside a factory gate, lunch pail in hand, eyes tired but proud. She smiled, visibly relieved, and moved on. Margaret watched the interaction. She thought about all the times she had expected deference without offering respect. The imbalance felt suddenly obvious, uncomfortable. The plane began its descent as dusk settled over the horizon. City lights flickered on below like scattered constellations. The captain's voice returned over the speakers, measured, subdued. "Ladies and gentlemen, we'll be landing shortly. Thank you for your patience this evening." No applause followed. None was needed. As the wheels touched down, the cabin jolted gently back into the physical world. Phones came out, seatbelts clicked. But something intangible remained suspended, carried with them beyond the runway. At the gate, passengers stood and retrieved their bags more slowly than usual. People made eye contact, nodded. A few shook Harold's hand as they passed. Not reverent, not grateful, simply acknowledging a moment shared. Margaret lingered. When she reached him, she stopped. "I hope you mean what you said," she told him. "About what comes next." Harold met her gaze. "I always do." She nodded and walked on. Harold was among the last to leave the aircraft. He stepped onto the jet bridge, the familiar scent greeting him again. This time, it did not feel like exile. At the end of the bridge, Monica Hale waited. She handed him a slim folder. "Everything will proceed formally from here," she said. "Press will ask questions by morning." Harold accepted the folder. They should. Monica hesitated. "You could have avoided all of this." Harold looked back at the plane, now quiet, empty. "Avoiding it is how it lasts," he said. They walked together into the terminal. The airport buzzed with its usual rhythm, unaware of the shift that had just occurred within one narrow cabin. By morning, footage would surface. Statements would be released. Opinions would clash. But for Harold, the measure of the day had already been taken. He adjusted his grip on the briefcase and kept walking, knowing that the real work was only beginning. The terminal did not slow down for anyone. It never did. Travelers streamed past Harold Whitman and Monica Hale as they walked side by side, their footsteps steady against the polished floor. Screens flashed departures and delays. Coffee machines hissed. Somewhere, a child cried. Life continued, indifferent to the reckoning that had just taken place in the air. At the end of the concourse, a small conference room waited behind a frosted glass door. Inside, fluorescent lights hummed softly. A long table, bottled water untouched, 3 empty chairs already pulled back, as if someone had expected urgency. Monica closed the door behind them. "This will be the first of many conversations," she said. Harold set the briefcase on the table, but did not sit. He loosened the collar of his shirt slightly, the only outward sign of fatigue he allowed himself. "I want the full incident timeline," he said. "Every decision point, every name." "You'll have it," Monica replied. "The board has been notified. Legal is standing by." Harold nodded. He was quiet for a moment, listening to the muted sounds of the terminal through the glass. He knew that quiet. It was the calm before a narrative took over, before speculation replaced facts. A knock sounded at the door. Daniel Brooks entered, tablet in hand, expression carefully neutral. Behind him came a man Harold had not seen yet. Mid-60s, silver hair, expensive suit worn comfortably, not performatively. Richard Allen, acting chief executive until the board finished its transition. Harold and Allen regarded each other for a brief second. Not rivals, not allies, something closer to mirrors. "I wish our first proper meeting were under different circumstances," Allen said. "So do I," Harold replied. "But this one matters." They sat. Brooks placed the tablet on the table and began outlining the sequence of events. The seat reassignment request, the complaint, the escalation, the removal. Each timestamp landed with clinical precision. As the minutes passed, Alan's expression tightened. He stopped Brooks twice to ask clarifying questions, not defensive, analytical. When Brooks finished, the room fell quiet. "This is a systemic failure," Alan said finally, "not an isolated lapse." Harold leaned forward. "Exactly." Alan folded his hands. "You understand the implications. Public trust, regulatory oversight, union response." "I do," Harold said. "And I also understand the alternative." Silence. Monica watched him carefully. "You're prepared for the fallout?" Harold met her gaze. "I've been preparing for it my entire career." Alan exhaled slowly. "The board will want decisive action." "They'll get it," Harold said, "but not reckless action." Alan nodded, a hint of relief flickering across his face. Outside the room, phones were already lighting up. Texts, emails, clips recorded discreetly by passengers who had sensed history unfolding. A narrative was forming, whether they approved of it or not. In a quiet office on another floor, Linda Cooper stared at the blank screen of her phone. The uniform lay folded beside her, the wings pin still attached. She had not cried yet. Shock had its own numbness. She replayed the moment Harold had said, "Harm doesn't always announce itself." For the first time, she wondered how many times she had mistaken order for righteousness. How many times she had believed efficiency excused erosion. Her phone buzzed again. This time, she answered. Captain Keller stood alone in the parking structure, the concrete cold beneath his shoes. His car sat untouched, keys heavy in his hand. He had received the call. Administrative leave, mandatory evaluation, union review pending. He looked up at the sky, streaked now with the last orange light of evening. He had always believed authority came from decisiveness. He had forgotten that judgment was its twin, not its servant. Back in the conference room, Alan stood. "I'll brief the board tonight," he said. "We'll reconvene in the morning." Harold rose with him. "Thank you." Alan paused at the door. "For what it's worth," he said, "you could have let this disappear quietly." Harold's voice was calm. "That's why it never does." Alan left. Monica gathered her folder. "Press will ask for a statement." "They'll get one," Harold said. "In the morning." Clear. Measured. No names yet. Monica nodded. "And the crew?" "Administrative separation pending review," Harold said, "with support resources offered. Accountability does not require cruelty." Monica allowed herself a small nod of respect. When she left, Harold remained alone in the room. He finally sat, the chair creaking softly under his weight. The exhaustion arrived then, uninvited, but deserved. He closed his eyes briefly. He thought of the cabin, the silence, the nod from the older man, the woman invited forward, the way power had shifted not with a shout, but with a refusal to disappear. His phone vibrated, a message from an unknown number. "You didn't have to do that." Harold read it once, then typed back, "Yes, I did." He slipped the phone away and stood. Outside, the terminal lights reflected off the glass, turning the night into a grid of motion and pause. Harold walked back into it, unescorted now, just another traveller among many. But the space around him felt different, as if the air itself remembered. By the time he reached the exit, the first news alert buzzed across screens inside the terminal bar. No details yet, just a headline, an incident, a delay, a question mark. Harold stepped into the cool night air and breathed deeply. Tomorrow, the story would belong to everyone. Tonight, it belonged to the truth. And that, he knew, was enough to begin. Morning arrived without ceremony. It never announced itself when consequences were still settling. Harold Whitman stood at the window of a modest hotel room overlooking the runway, watching planes lift into the pale grey sky one by one. Engines roared, then faded. Departures continued. Systems moved on. They always did. The question was whether they learned anything on the way. His phone lay face down on the desk. It had been vibrating for hours. He let it wait. On the television mounted to the wall, a muted news channel scrolled a headline across the bottom of the screen. Airline delays after onboard incident. Details pending. No names yet. Just enough to invite speculation. Harold turned away from the window and finally picked up the phone. 37 missed calls. Messages stacked on messages. Board members, legal counsel, media relations. Old colleagues who suddenly remembered his number. People who had not called in years, but now felt the need to weigh in. He scrolled past most of them and tapped one contact. Monica answered on the second ring. "It's already moving faster than we expected," she said. Footage surfaced overnight. Harold closed his eyes briefly. From inside the cabin. Yes, multiple angles. No audio at first, but that's coming. He imagined it clearly. The stillness, the faces, the words he had chosen carefully, now stripped of context and handed to strangers. "Are we ready?" he asked. Monica did not hesitate. "We are." "Good," Harold said. "Then let it move." He ended the call and sat on the edge of the bed. For a moment, the weight of it all pressed down. Not fear, not doubt, just the sheer mass of responsibility. The kind that did not dissipate with applause or outrage. Across the city, in a quiet suburban kitchen, Margaret Reynolds sat at her breakfast table, untouched toast growing cold in front of her. Her tablet lay open to a paused video, a shaky clip. The aisle, a familiar coat, her own voice, faint but unmistakable. She'd watched it once, then again. Each time, hoping she would hear something different, something less revealing. The comments scrolled faster than she could read. Some defended her. Most did not. She shut the tablet off and stared at her reflection in the darkened screen. For the first time in a long while, she did not recognize the woman looking back. At the same hour, Linda Cooper sat on the edge of her bed, phone in her lap, fingers numb. Her name was everywhere now. Not fully spelled out yet, but enough clues for anyone who wanted to find her. She had spent the night awake, staring at the ceiling, listening to the distant sound of traffic and the louder sound of her own thoughts. Every moment replayed with brutal clarity. Every word she could have chosen differently. She opened an email from Human Resources and read it slowly. Administrative separation, support services, pending review. Polite language wrapped around a hard truth. Captain Keller did not watch the news. He did not need to. His inbox told him everything. Meeting requests cancelled. A message from the union asking him not to speak publicly. A calendar suddenly empty. He sat in his study, flight manuals lining the shelves behind him, and realized something simple and devastating. He had always thought the uniform protected him. He had never considered that it also exposed him. Back at the airport, a conference room filled with voices. Harold stood at the head of the table now, not as a passenger, not as a symbol, but as a decision-maker. The board members appeared on screens around the room, faces serious, alert. "We are not here to manage optics," Harold said. "We are here to correct a failure." A man on one of the screens leaned forward. "The public wants accountability." "They'll get it," Harold replied, "but not a spectacle." Another voice joined. "There are calls for immediate firings." Harold's gaze was steady. "There are processes for that, and there are lessons. If we skip one, we lose both." The room fell quiet. This airline cannot ask for trust while teaching fear, Harold continued. We don't need more rules. We need better judgment. And judgment comes from culture, not checklists. Some nodded. Others hesitated. Change always made people uncomfortable, especially those who had benefited from stillness. Harold straightened. Effective immediately, he said. All customer-facing staff will undergo retraining focused on discretion, de-escalation, and bias recognition, leadership included. A pause. And seat assignments will be honored without exception, unless safety is verifiably at risk. No status overrides that. The words were simple. Their impact was not. Later that morning, Harold returned to the terminal. No security detail. No announcement. Just another man walking through a familiar space that now felt subtly altered. People recognized him. Some stared. Some whispered. A few nodded. At a coffee stand near the gates, a young attendant froze when she realized who he was. Her hands shook as she handed him the cup. You don't have to be nervous, Harold said gently. She laughed weakly. Hard not to be. He smiled, faint and genuine. You're doing fine. As he walked away, he heard her exhale. Harold stopped once more near the windows overlooking the runway. A plane taxied past, sunlight glinting off its side. The same model, the same airline, but not the same moment. He thought of the older woman moved forward, of the man who had spoken up, of the silence that had finally been broken. This was not the end. It was the echo. And echoes, he knew, traveled farther than anyone expected. The boardroom emptied slowly after the call ended. Screens went dark one by one, leaving Harold Whitman alone with the faint reflection of himself in the glass wall. The city beyond was waking up fully now. Traffic thickened. Planes lined up, nose to tail. The rhythm of motion returned, but something in the machinery had been adjusted. A screw tightened where it had long been loose. Harold gathered his papers and left without ceremony. No one stopped him. No one needed to. Authority, when it settled, did not announce itself with escorts. Down the corridor he passed a group of flight attendants waiting for a briefing. Their voices dropped as he walked by. Not fear. Awareness. The kind that sharpened posture and softened tone. He acknowledged them with a nod and kept moving. At the end of the hall, Monica Hale caught up with him. Media is requesting a sit-down, she said, late afternoon. Harold slowed. Not stopped. Not yet. I'll give them a statement, he said. No interviews today. Monica nodded. There's something else. She hesitated. Margaret Reynolds requested a meeting. Harold considered that. He pictured the woman at her breakfast table, the paused video, the comments scrolling too fast to outrun. He understood that place. It was where defenses thinned. Schedule it, he said, tomorrow morning. Monica studied his face. You don't owe her anything. I know, Harold replied. That's why I'll meet her. They parted ways at the terminal entrance. Harold stepped into the flow of travelers again, coat slung over his arm, briefcase in hand. He moved through the crowd without hurry, letting the pace of others wash around him. He had learned long ago that speed was rarely the same thing as progress. In a quiet office across the airport, Linda Cooper sat across from a counselor she had barely listened to for the past 10 minutes. The counselor's voice was calm, practiced, but Linda's thoughts kept circling the same memory. The way she had dismissed the boarding pass, the way she had chosen ease over equity because it felt efficient in the moment. She rubbed her hands together and finally spoke. I didn't think I was doing something wrong, she said. I thought I was protecting the system. The counselor nodded. Many people do. Linda swallowed. What if the system was wrong? The counselor held her gaze. Then the question becomes what you do when you see it. Linda leaned back, the weight of that settling in. For the first time since the night before, she did not feel defensive. She felt small. And strangely, that felt like a beginning. Across town, Captain Thomas Keller stood in a quiet hangar, looking up at the belly of an aircraft that was not his to command anymore. A mechanic passed without greeting him, not out of disrespect, out of uncertainty. Keller had become a question mark. His phone buzzed, a message from a former colleague. No words, just a link. He opened it. A still image. Harold standing in the aisle. The caption beneath it was already forming a narrative. Too simple, too sharp. Keller closed the link and pocketed the phone. He understood something then that years in the cockpit had not taught him. Control was temporary. Judgment lingered. Late afternoon arrived with cameras and lights. Harold stood behind a podium in a plain conference room, the airline logo muted behind him. No dramatic backdrop, no swelling music. Just a man and a microphone. He waited until the room quieted. "Yesterday," he began, "an incident occurred on one of our flights that should not have happened." He spoke slowly, clearly. No deflection, no euphemisms. A passenger was removed from his seat based on perception rather than policy. That passenger was me. A ripple moved through the room. Not surprise. Confirmation. "But this is not about me," Harold continued. "It is about how easily systems fail when convenience replaces fairness. It is about how silence becomes permission." Questions followed, sharp, repetitive. He answered each with restraint, never assigning blame publicly, never softening accountability. When asked if the crew had been fired, he paused. "They have been removed from duty pending review," he said. Accountability requires process. It also requires learning. If we stop at punishment, we miss the point. The cameras clicked, pens scratched. Harold concluded with a sentence he had chosen carefully. "We will not measure our success by how quietly this passes, but by how rarely it happens again." He stepped away from the podium and left without looking back. That evening, Margaret Reynolds sat in a small cafe near her home, hands wrapped around a cup she did not drink. She watched people pass outside, unremarkable, unimportant to her until now. She saw herself in them in ways she had not before. Her phone buzzed, a message from her assistant reminding her of the meeting scheduled for the next morning. She typed back a single word. Confirmed. Night fell gently. Harold returned to the hotel, the same room overlooking the runway. He set the briefcase on the desk and opened it again. This time he removed the framed photograph and placed it beside the window. His father smiled back at him, frozen in a moment before years and compromise. Harold felt the familiar ache rise and pass. He lay down, fully clothed, staring at the ceiling. Sleep came slowly, then all at once. The next morning broke clear. Harold arrived early at the office where Margaret waited. She stood when he entered, unsure whether to offer her hand. He did not force the moment. He gestured for her to sit. She spoke first. "I've replayed it 100 times," she said. "Every word, every look." Harold listened. "I thought I was defending something I'd earned," she continued. "I see now I was protecting myself from change." Harold nodded. "Change asks things of us, usually before we're ready." Margaret's eyes filled. "I don't expect forgiveness." Harold considered that. "Forgiveness is personal," he said. "Responsibility is not." She took a breath. "What happens now?" "Now," Harold said, "you decide whether this moment ends with regret or begins with reflection." She nodded slowly. "I understand." When she left, Harold remained seated for a while, hands folded, eyes unfocused. He thought of the cabin again, the hum, the stillness, the choice not to disappear. Outside, a plane lifted off, its shadow sliding across the tarmac. The Echo was still moving, and it would keep moving, long after the headlines faded, carried by people who had watched, and those who had finally decided to speak. The first flight under the new policy boarded quietly, almost anticlimactically, as if the airline itself was holding its breath. Harold Whitman stood near the gate window, watching passengers line up without knowing they were part of a quiet turning point. No cameras, no statements, just routine, returning to a place it had forgotten how to live in. The gate agent scanned boarding passes with steady hands, eyes level, voice neutral. No glances that lingered too long, no judgments forming behind polite smiles. When an older man shuffled forward with a cane and fumbled for his wallet, no one sighed, no one rushed him. The line simply slowed, collectively, without complaint. Harold noticed everything. He boarded last, not out of symbolism, but habit. He preferred to see the whole picture before stepping into it. The cabin felt different. Not warmer, not friendlier, just steadier. The kind of calm that came from clarity rather than fear. Seat 1A remained empty. He passed it without stopping and took his place in 1B. The briefcase slid easily under the seat. He loosened his collar and exhaled as the engines began their low, patient hum. Outside the window, the runway lights blurred into long, white lines as dusk gathered again, another day folding into the next. A young gate agent appeared in the aisle, her movements careful but confident. She paused beside row 26 and leaned down to speak to a woman traveling alone, hair pulled back, eyes tired in a way that spoke of years rather than hours. "Ma'am," she said softly, "we'd like to invite you to move forward if you're comfortable." The woman blinked, unsure she had heard correctly. She glanced around, then nodded slowly. The surrounding passengers shifted to make room, offering smiles that carried no expectation. She passed Harold on her way forward. Their eyes met briefly. He nodded once. She returned it, something like relief crossing her face. When she settled into seat 1A, her hands rested on the armrests as if grounding herself. A flight attendant offered her water without ceremony. The woman whispered, "Thank you," voice unsteady, and looked out the window with a smile that took its time arriving. Harold leaned back and closed his eyes. He thought of the night the plane had not left the gate, of the weight in the cabin, of the moment silence had cracked open and shown what lived underneath. He thought of Linda, of Keller, of Margaret, each of them caught in the same current, each reacting differently when it pulled. Change was never clean. It did not arrive with perfect edges or universal applause. It arrived like this, incremental, uneven, real. The seatbelt sign chimed off. Conversation resumed, low and ordinary. A man laughed softly at something on his phone. Someone coughed. A magazine page turned. Harold opened his briefcase and removed the photograph once more. His father's eyes stared back, steady and unassuming. A man who had taught him, without lectures, that dignity was not something given by systems, but revealed by how you moved through them. Harold slid the photo back into place and closed the case. Across the aisle, a middle-aged woman leaned toward him. "Excuse me," she said. "I just wanted to say, this feels different." He met her gaze. "Different is the beginning," she nodded, satisfied, and returned to her book. The flight attendant approached with a small tray. "Coffee or tea, sir?" "Coffee, please." She poured carefully, meeting his eyes with a quiet respect that did not ask for recognition. As she handed him the cup, she hesitated. "Thank you for yesterday," she said, barely above a whisper. Harold accepted the cup. "Thank you for today." She smiled and moved on. As the plane leveled off, the city fell away beneath the clouds, a patchwork of lights dissolving into darkness. Harold watched it without urgency. The work ahead would be long. Policies rewritten, training enforced, resistance encountered. But the hardest part had already been done. The moment of refusal, the decision not to disappear. He thought of the countless people who never got the chance to refuse, who swallowed indignities because the cost of speaking was too high, who moved seats, stepped aside, accepted less because it was easier for everyone else. He could not change their past, but he could shape what came next. The cabin lights dimmed further. A calm settled in, not the fragile calm of avoidance, but the sturdy kind that followed reckoning. Harold sipped his coffee and allowed himself a rare moment of stillness. When the plane began its descent, the older woman in seat 1A reached up to steady herself, smiling now without hesitation. The flight attendant checked in on her, unprompted. The gesture was small. It mattered anyway. The wheels touched down smoothly. Applause rippled through the cabin, spontaneous and brief. Not celebration, gratitude. As passengers stood and gathered their belongings, movement was unhurried. People waited for one another, made space, offered help without being asked. No one spoke about the incident directly. They did not need to. It lived between them, shaping behavior more effectively than any announcement. Harold waited again, last to stand. He stepped into the aisle and followed the slow procession toward the door. As he reached the exit, the captain stood to one side, a different man now, posture careful, eyes thoughtful. "Thank you for flying with us," the captain said. Harold met his gaze. "Thank you for getting us here." The jet bridge opened to the familiar smell of metal and motion. Harold stepped into it, the sound of the terminal rising to meet him. Another journey complete, another one beginning. As he walked toward the exit, the airport screens flickered with departures and arrivals, lives intersecting and separating without ceremony. Somewhere, a story was being told about a man removed from a seat. Somewhere else, another story was starting quietly, without headlines, about a woman invited forward. Harold adjusted his grip on the briefcase and kept walking, blending into the crowd. Just another traveler, carrying something unseen, but unmistakable. If this story resonated with you, tap like to support it. Subscribe for more stories that matter, and leave a comment with these 3 words. Speak up, always.